Part 3, politics. In the 1950s, the Cold War now had an incredible new medium, television. At the end of World War II, the television was a toy for only a few thousand wealthy Americans. Just 10 years later, nearly 2/3 of American households had a TV. The growth is also reflected in other parts of the world. Of course, America being the wealthiest country after the war, the country producing these televisions. But the Soviet Union, other nations around the world were starting to obviously very much embrace the technology. The world would now see the moving images of the rise and fall of the United States Senator, the legal challenge to the system of segregation in the United States, the bearded revolutionary in Cuba who would overthrow a corrupt dictator and be a thorn in the side of the United States for over 50 years, and the coronation of a new Queen of England, who, by the way, is still with us today.
Speech of Joseph McCarthy from West Virginia, February 9th, 1950. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight, as we celebrate the 141st birthday of one of the greatest men in American history, I would like to be able to talk about what a glorious day today is in the history of the world. As we celebrate the birth of the man who with his whole heart and soul hated war, I would like to be able to speak of the peace in our time, of war being outlawed, and of the world disarmament. These would be truly appropriate things to be able to mention as we celebrate the birthday of Abraham Lincoln. 5 years after a world war has been won, men's hearts should anticipate a long peace, and men's minds should be free from the heavy weight that comes with war. But this is not a such period. For this is not a period of peace. This is a time of the Cold War. This is a time when all the world is split into vast, increasingly hostile armed camps, a time of a great armament race. Today we are engaged in a final all-out battle between communistic atheism and Christianity. The modern champions of communism have selected this is the time, and ladies and gentlemen, the chips are down. They are truly down. Unless we face this fact, we shall pay the price that must be paid by those who wait too long. The reason why we find ourselves in the position of impotency is not because of our only powerful potential enemy has sent men to invade our shores, but rather because of the traitorous actions of those who have been treated so well by this nation. It has not been the less fortunate or members of minority groups who have been traitorous to this nation, but rather those who had all the benefits that the wealthiest nation on earth has to offer: the finest homes, the finest college education, and the finest jobs the government can give. I have here in my hand a list of 205, a list of names that were made known to the Secretary of State as being members of the Communist Party, and who nevertheless are still working and shaping policy in the State Department.
I would like to speak briefly and simply about a serious national condition. It is a national feeling of fear and frustration that could result in national suicide and the end of everything that we Americans hold dear. I speak as briefly as possible because too much harm has already been done with irresponsible words of bitterness and selfish political opportunism. I speak as briefly as possible because the issue is too great to be obscured by eloquence. I speak simply and briefly in the hope that my words will be taken to heart. I speak as a Republican, I speak as a woman, and I speak as a United States Senator. I speak as an American. I think that it is high time for the United States Senate and its members to do some soul searching, for us to weigh our consciences on a manner in which we perform our duty to the people of America, on the manner in which we are using or abusing our individual powers and privileges. I think that it is high time that we remembered that we are sworn to uphold and defend the Constitution. I think it is high time that we remembered that the Constitution, as amended, speaks not only to the freedom of speech, but also of trial by jury instead of trial by accusation. Whether it be a criminal prosecution in court or a character prosecution in the Senate, there is little practical distinction when the life of a person has been ruined. Those of us who shout the loudest about Americanism in making character assassinations are all too frequently those who, by our own words and acts, ignore some of the basic principles of Americanism. The right to criticize, the right to uphold unpopular beliefs, the right to protest, the right of independent thought. The exercise of these rights should not cost one single American citizen his reputation or his right to a livelihood, nor should he be in danger of losing his reputation or livelihood merely because he happens to know someone who upholds unpopular beliefs. Who of us doesn't? Otherwise, none of us could call our souls our own.
This is the opinion of the courts regarding the case of Brown versus the Board of Education. These cases come to us from the states of Kansas, South Carolina, Virginia, and Delaware. In each of the cases, minors of the Negro race, through their legal representatives, seek the aid of the courts in obtaining admission to the public schools of their community on a non-segregated basis. In each instance, they had been denied admission to schools attended by white children under laws requiring or permitting segregation according to race. This segregation was alleged to deprive the plaintiffs of the equal protection of the laws under the 14th Amendment. We conclude that in the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place. Separate educational facilities are inherently unequal. Therefore, we hold that the plaintiffs and others similarly situated for whom the actions have been brought are, by reason of the segregation complained of, deprived of the equal protection of the laws.
At the opening of today's 1,000-year-old rite, the Archbishop of Canterbury presented Queen Elizabeth to the people as our undoubted queen, that is by hereditary right. 3 hours later, she went forth from the abbey amid the greatest rejoicing, a crowned and consecrated queen. No such delight has hailed a sovereign's coronation before. Throughout the ritual, the theater glowed like the canvas of a great Renaissance colorist. There was the queen in her golden robes. There were the archbishops with their mitres and copes. Canterbury's different from York's in color, but both ornate. Canterbury's cope was the more beautiful. It was of a cream shade covered with a delicate gold design. There was the whole bench of bishops in scarlet and white ranged along the north side of the theater. It is easy to fall into hyperbole at such moments of mass emotion as this, but there is no exaggeration here. Others of our queens, Elizabeth I and Victoria, for example, have swayed the hearts of their people after a time, but Elizabeth II captured them from the start. She has done it not merely in virtue of her youth and grace, but because she joins to these qualities the high seriousness we have come to associate with the House of Windsor. That gravity was hers today and perfectly attuned to the occasion. It made its subtle appeal to all hearts. It stirred the sense of a young woman set apart and dedicated, and even a little lonely, and greatly deserving a nation's affection and support.
The following article is from the New York Times, January 4th, 1959, by Herbert Matthews, on Fidel Castro and the Cuban Revolution. The roughest, the bravest, the most brutal of modern Latin American dictators, General Fulgencio Batista met his match this week. The progress made by Fidel Castro and his 26th of July movement from a hunted band of a dozen youths at the eastern end of the island in December 1956 to their present triumph had no element of luck in it. There had to be a long, hard, costly, and bitter struggle, first on the defensive in the Sierra Maestra, and then standing out on the offensive in the last 6 months. The whole youth of Cuba was behind Fidel, as he is universally called throughout Latin America. Thousands of boys and girls gave their lives, thousands suffered abominable torture at the hands of the police and army, and thousands spent varying terms in prison. But Fidel never lacked recruits. Those who knew General Batista best here in Havana believe that it was not until the last few weeks that he grasped the gravity of the situation. He could not believe that Fidel was beating him and his army.
Part 4, culture. Ending with the popular culture of the 1950s, we can really see the larger trends of the period play out. Sugary pop songs, escapist places, the introduction of a smooth but flawed hero who fought the bad guys with style and had typical time period attitudes toward women. The escalation of the Cold War into a space race, which caused Americans to pour millions of dollars into their classrooms to combat the Soviet threat. The rise of one of the most important entertainers the world has ever seen, as a result of television, of course, and the tragic death of one of his fellow rock and rollers.
Lollipop, lollipop, oh, lolly, 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 lollipop, lollipop, oh, lolly, 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 lollipop, lollipop, oh, lolly, 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 lollipop. Lollipop, lollipop, oh, lolly, 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 lollipop, lollipop, oh, lolly, 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 lollipop, lollipop, oh, lolly, 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 lollipop. Come on, baby, lollipop, tell you why. The taste is sweeter than an apple pie. And when he doesn't shake your rock and dance, then I haven't got a chance. I call him lollipop, lollipop, oh, lolly, 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 lollipop, lollipop, oh, lolly, 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 lollipop, lollipop, oh, lolly, 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 lollipop. Sweeter than candy on a stick, huckleberry, cherry, or lime. If you had a chance, he'd be your pick. A lollipop is mine. Lollipop, lollipop, oh, lolly, 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 lollipop, lollipop, oh, lolly, 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 lollipop, lollipop, oh, lolly, 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 lollipop. Crazy way he thrills me, tell you why. Just like a lightning from the sky. He loves to kiss me till I can't see straight. Gee, my lollipop is great. I call him lollipop, lollipop, oh, lolly, 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 lollipop, lollipop, oh, lolly, 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 lollipop, lollipop, oh, lolly, 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 lollipop, 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 oh, lolly, 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 lollipop, lollipop, oh, lolly, 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 lollipop. Lollipop, lollipop, oh, lolly, 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 lollipop, lollipop, oh, lolly, 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 lollipop, lollipop, oh, lolly, 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 lollipop, a lollipop.
I've just taken a tour of this unique $17 million wonderland that Disney beamingly refers to as 160 acres of happiness. My guide was the boss himself. Like a kid who's got the toy he wanted, 53-year-old Walt bubbled with boyish pride and excitement as he ushered me into his brand new world of make-believe. Just, what is Disneyland? I asked. It's a fabulous playground, he answered. Something of a fair, a city from the Arabian Nights, a metropolis of the future, a showpiece of magic and living facts, but above all, a place for people to find happiness and knowledge. It's something I dreamed up years ago. We entered the grounds on an old-time railroad station and climbed into a scaled-down replica of the locomotives that puffed their way west 3/4 of a century ago. The shining little engine will pull 6 coaches carrying 300 passengers around the 1.5-mile perimeter of Disneyland. Fantasyland offers alluring rides, though nothing like those found in a conventional amusement park. There's the Peter Pan that takes you flying over the moonlit London in a pirate galleon to a never-never-land of mermaids, buccaneers, Indians, and lost little boys. There's the Snow White that carries you into a den of the Wicked Witch. and the Mr. Toad driven through a trip in a 1903 automobile that goes careening into a barn and delivers you beyond the pearly gates to accompaniment of heavenly music. Each amusement in Fantasyland related to a character created by Disney and his cartoonist. On hand are Dumbo the elephant, the Three Little Pigs, the Seven Dwarfs, Pinocchio, and all the rest. The section of the park that I fell for hardest is Adventureland. It is a Tahitian settlement with a rich display of tropical birds, fish, shells, and flowers. You can buy souvenirs at the trading post just as if you were actually in the South Seas. An explorer's boat takes you down a tropical river where an electrical impulse starts lifelike plastic crocodiles swimming toward the boat.
Elvis on The Ed Sullivan Show, Time Magazine, 1956. Elvis Presley, the 21-year-old Bobby Soxer's delight, shot The Ed Sullivan Show's rating up to 43.7, highest in 2 years. Actor Charles Lawton, whose glib tongue and his dumpling cheek, introduced Elvis with, "Ed, I insisted I give a high tone to the proceedings." Then to the frenzied shrieks of the teenagers let Hillbilly Presley take over. Crooner Presley, sideburns dripping with sweat and goose grease, mumbled through 3 songs, gave his guitar a thorough clouting, contorted his mouth suggestively and his pelvis more so. When it was over, parents and critics, as usual, did a lot of futile grumbling at the vulgarity of the strange new phenomenon that must somehow be reckoned with.
February 3rd, 1959, the day the music died. An Iowa air crash kills 3 singers. Rock and roll stars and pilot die as chartered craft falls after its takeoff. Mason City, Iowa, February 3rd. 3 rock and roll singers whose records and appearances have stirred millions of teenagers were killed early today in a plane crash near here. The 4-plane chartered craft carrying the trio and their pilot crashed within minutes after taking off in light snow from the Mason City airport. The victims were Buddy Holly, 22 years old, of Lubbock, Texas; Richie Valens, 17, of Los Angeles; J.P. Richardson, 24, of Beaumont, Texas; and Roger Peterson, 21, of nearby Clear Lake, Iowa, the pilot. The troupe with which the singers had played before about 1,100 teenagers and their parents at the Surf Ballroom in the Clear Lake last night. The Beechcraft Bonanza, chartered from the Dwyer Flying Service here, was to take the 3 singers to Fargo, North Dakota, in advance for the troupe's engagement there tonight. The others went by chartered bus. Authorities blamed weather for conditions for the crash. Snow was falling, the temperature was 18 degrees, and a southerly wind was blowing at 35 miles an hour when the plane took off at about 1 a.m. The plane came down about 5 miles northwest of the airport on the Albert Jewell Farm. No one heard the crash. The left wingtip apparently struck the ground first and flew off. Pieces of the wreckage ripped off as the plane plowed about 2 city blocks distances across the field and piled up against the fence. Mrs. Carol Anderson, whose husband manages the Surf Ballroom, said everything sounded okay when the plane took off. Hollywood trade sources said the combined record sales of the 3 singers was in the millions. Mr. Valens, whose real name was Richard Valenzuela, and who left San Fernando, California high school last year to seek a singing career, recently finished his first motion picture, Go Johnny Go. His first recording 6 months ago was Donna, which sold more than 1 million copies, the Delphi Record Company said. Mr. Hawley, star of the Crickets, who also appeared at the Surf, hit the rock and roll pinnacle with his recordings of Peggy Sue and That'll Be the Day. Both reportedly sold more than 1 million copies. Mr. Richardson was on leave as a disc jockey, singer, and program director at station KTRM in Beaumont. His Channel E Lace was rated by Billboard for Time as the 3rd most played record and has been released in 37 other countries.
An excerpt from the first novel that featured Bond, James Bond. Speaking of his love interest, or maybe love interest, Vesper Lynd, Bond thought, quote, "And then there was this pest of a girl. He sighed. Women were for recreation. On a job, they got in the way and fogged things up with sex and hurt and feelings and all emotional baggage they carried around. One had to look out for them and take care of them. After Vesper is kidnapped, Bond says, quote, this is what he had been afraid of. These blithering women who thought they could just do man's work. Why the hell couldn't they just stay at home and mind their pot and pans and stick to their frocks and gossip and leave men's work to the men? And now for this to happen to him, just when the job had come off so beautifully. For Vesper to fall for an old trick like that and get herself snatched and probably held to ransom like some bloody heroine in a strip cartoon.
At this moment, the first man-made moon is circling the globe and telling mankind of its journey. The news of this achievement came from Moscow in an announcement which said, the first satellite was successfully launched in the USSR on October 4th. It is fitted with radio transmitters continuously emitting signals. Within hours, receivers outside the Soviet Union began picking up the satellite's pulsating signal. Thus confirmed, the Soviet announcement inevitably was a sobering one for the West, particularly the United States. It tended to confirm the claim by Moscow 6 weeks ago of the first successful test of an intercontinental ballistic missile, and indicated that the USSR was, for the moment at least, ahead of the US in the crucial rocket race. The Russians sought to make political capital of their satellite, Sputnik in Russian, by calling the achievement that of the new socialist society. But there was wide recognition that this was also an achievement of profound scientific significance for all of mankind. It represented a step toward escape from man's imprisonment to Earth in its thin envelope of atmosphere, and opened new vistas of knowledge and travel in space. What the late British astronomer Sir Arthur S. Eddington said a generation ago was no longer true, that man in his search for knowledge of the universe was like a potato bug in a potato in the hold of a ship, trying to fathom from the ship's motions the nature of the vast sea.
All right, so we've got one more number for you. If I could right now get a round of applause for all of the student performers again, please. I also do kind of a show of hands sometimes. How many freshmen are participating? So first time. Thank you so much. We want you to participate again, hopefully for the next 4 years. One last quick note that I've been reminded of a few times tonight. This is, besides Mr. Fisk's birthday, which is really more important, it is also Elvis Presley's birthday tonight. So really we shouldn't have had school today, but I guess this thing's gonna work ourselves out. So for our last number, we'll call up choir, concert crowd, and ladies first for Jailhouse Rock.
Jailhouse rock.
Thanks for having me.